In this episode of the Trophy Dash podcast, I get to interview legendary coach Randy Reisinger. Randy and his brother Steve created a dynasty in Little 500 with a team called Delta Chi. We go through every year of the race that they won. They won 7 out of 10 years. And we break it down. We talk about how they got started and how they innovated the race. This is a great episode of Trophy Dash. You're going to love it. And by the way, Trophy Dash is sponsored by Inkwell Cafe, Bloomington's best coffee house. If you're in town for Little 500, stop by Inkwell Cafe and have breakfast and some coffee. Now the episode. Today I get the honor, the privilege to speak to Coach Randy Reisinger. Hi, Randy.
Hi, Jim. I can't see the top of your head. Now I can.
There, let me get a little lower. Look, it's an honor to talk to you. When I first joined the Cutters in Little 5, was the fall of 1990, right? And a big draw was the stories, the people, the personalities, and this history of the event and the history of the Delta Chi team. And I remember hearing about you and your brother Steve, and just being kind of mind blown at the levels of complexity and the thought and attention and love that went into this bike race. That was the fall of 1990. Where were you in the fall of 1990?
Good question. Let's see. I was in California, I guess, by then, because I moved out there in '83.
Okay.
So yeah, and those were some years that I missed the race. About 6 or 7 years that I missed the race. So that's where I was about then.
And were you're working in California?
I was working in California. I left Apple in about '85. So I was doing a lot of consulting in Silicon Valley with large tech companies.
The early days of Apple, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I worked for Apple from '80 to '85. And so after Apple, I was doing consulting in Silicon Valley, technology consulting.
You once made a comment about Little 5 is all about information and gathering information and using information. I'm guessing what you learned at Little 5, you were able to apply to those careers.
Well, yeah, I learned a lot of things in Little 5 that I applied to careers. That might have been one of them. But, when we started out, Delta Chi was a very small fraternity, about 24 people, I think, and having trouble sort of keeping the house together financially. And Steve was president of the house, and my brother Steve, and he, decided that the way for the house to grow and become, less financially stressed was to win Little 5. He said, this event is too big and important on campus to not do well in.
What year was that, Randy? About?
That was about, that comment was probably about 1968. And so,
what was going on in Little 5 around then? Like, who were the top teams? Like, was it a big event? Was it growing?
It was about half of the size of event that it later would become. So it was pretty much just a campus event. People didn't really come in from all around to see the thing, and you didn't see that many fans or people there. I mean, it was probably attendance was, I would guess, 6,000 or 8,000. So it was a big event on campus, but it was not the event that it became later. And so coming from this small fraternity that was in kind of dire straits, and with the idea of making a presence, building a brand for Delta Chi around the bike race, essentially.
Okay.
The first sort of issues were, well, how do we go about this? And I had played some sports in high school, and I think Steve assumed that I would be a good rider or something. But in the interim, um, Steve met Eddie Van Gys through an alumnus in Evanston, Illinois. And we decided, well, we need more people like Eddie, not like me, for riders. But I was still sort of interested in this challenge of how do we win the race. And once Eddie came to campus, he and I became good friends, and I just started learning a lot of stuff from him. He taught us everything in those early days. I knew nothing about racing, Little Five, or cycling at that point. And Eddie started us down the road of, well, here's what you need to know. And
well, let me go back to Tad. When Steve had that idea of like, let's use Little Five to boost the fraternity.
Yeah.
People jump on board. Was that a crazy idea? What was the perception of that?
So the way it went was he asked me to go for a walk with him, and we walked over to the Little Five Stadium, and he pointed to the track and the seats and so forth, and kind of described, what the race was and so forth. And he said that it was too important on campus not to, do well. And so he kind of got me charged up about it. And then Eddie was the second person that got charged up about it, because Eddie came down when he was a senior and watched the race. Okay. And in the bike races Eddie was in, the largest crowd he'd raced in front of was like maybe 2,000 people.
Yeah.
And when he saw this, he just thought, I got to do this, right? It was exciting to him.
How does Eddie just randomly come to Little Five? Like, you guys kind of court him? Do you invite him?
Well, a banker in Evanston knew of Eddie, and he was a Delta Chi alumnus, and he called Steve and told him about Eddie. And then Steve invited Eddie down, contacted him, invited him down for Little 500. And that was Eddie's senior year, so that was 1968. Yeah. And I had watched the previous year's race, 67, I think, was the first race that I watched. And it just looked totally confusing to me, right? If the first time you watch the race, it's very, very hard to make sense of.
Right.
So when Eddie was there, that was the second race that I got to watch, and things were starting to make a little more sense, but it still seemed pretty random, pretty chaotic.
You watched the race with Eddie? You sit in the stands together?
Yeah, we did. Mm-hmm.
You guys became kind of instant friends?
Yeah, really so, because he would tell us stuff about cycling, and I was fascinated with some of the details that I never would have imagined, right? So yeah, we were tight initially, right from the start, I should say. And
such a great storyteller.
Yeah, and he was like, so for quite some time, the question you asked, how did it gain traction? For quite some time, it was just the three of us, and Eddie sort of put together a team, and he was, even though there was a designated coach, Eddie was doing more coaching than because he knew more about what was going on than the rest of us did. Yeah. And that first year, I think we finished, the first year he rode, we finished, I believe, 10th. Yeah. And then
Eddie has made a comment in the past that he really kind of felt the pressure of having to be a rider, be a coach, get this team going. Like, the weight of Delta Chi was on his shoulders.
Yes. And I wasn't as involved in that first year or two as I became later. But he would ask me to kind of coach him in several different ways, first to coach him and then to coach the team and so on. Because, he knew I had the interest, I was listening to him and so on. And the pressure that you mentioned was what he wanted to get rid of. He wanted to be more focused on riding. Mm-hmm. And that was actually something that we learned early on was, let's get all this other stuff out of the way, the preparation of meals, the mechanical, taking care of the bikes, all this other stuff. Let's get that out of the way so riders can just ride.
That was a big innovation for the time, probably.
It was a big innovation, but it was also the beginning of an organization. We sort of got to the point where if we're going to do that, we have to have mechanics, we have to have cooks, we have to have coaches, we have to have et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so what we built around Eddie was an organization. And it evolved over years. It didn't happen instantly, but that we later determined was really important to the successes that we would later have.
How did Eddie find teammates? Like Mark Cassidy joins the team shortly after. Like how do they go about finding more riders for the team?
Yeah, so Eddie, rode amateur races around the country, and he would go and he would talk to different riders, people that he knew. He knew Mark Cassidy and liked him, and Mark was a great guy. So he enlisted him, to come join the team. And usually the only thing it took to get guys excited about coming was letting them know how many fans there were at the race. And, these were all college age people typically. And there were some very attractive young ladies in the stands and so forth. And that sort of thing attracted, high school seniors and riders that Eddie knew. So in those first couple of years, Eddie was kind of responsible for putting the team together. As time passed, Steve and I, my brother Steve and I, would travel around the country to go to some of these races. Eddie would say, "Hey, there's a race in Kenosha on Thursday, or there's a race here or there on Saturday or something." And so we would drive and go to these races and meet riders. And in the process, that was one of the ways that we picked up more of the riders later on. But Eddie was he was good at spreading the word.
How did you explain Little Five to these guys in Wisconsin? Like, and did they think you were crazy, or did they get it?
Probably a lot of them thought we were crazy, because that wasn't a race that was really on the map among amateur riders in those days. But a few of them, got it or were interested enough to come check it out. And that was enough to build teams. You only needed 4 riders for a team. So if you talk to 12 people, you'd probably find 4 riders, something like that.
Yeah.
But it was, it was a tough slog in those days. When Mark Cassidy joined the team, that was a pretty good team, and they finished second. And the house was all excited when we finished 10th, because the house hadn't participated in the race probably 3 of the 4 preceding years, something like that. And so to get a 10th, finished in the top 10, that's great, But at some point we came to the conclusion that, nobody remembers who finished second, third, fourth, fifth. They remember who wins. So it was our goal at some point to win the race. And so those next years, while Eddie was there, were learning years for us, and years where we developed the organization. And it was by the time Eddie was a senior, we put sort of everything we had into the team, and we had clearly the strongest team out there. But we fell short. We came in second.
You, at 72, you collected Steve Dayton. You got him from Purdue to come down.
Yes, and he was reigning national champion at the time, so not a bad rider.
And a rider named Steve Schaefer also joins the team.
And Steve Schaefer had ridden Little Five twice or 3 times before, something like that, and was a good Little Five rider. He didn't race outside of Little Five, but he was a very good Little Five rider.
And this is a story I know well. Eddie's last year, really strong team, and you guys had a strategy that was to play out over 200 laps, where you would start to really fatigue the other teams and then pull away at the end. And then the rains come in, a big storm comes in. the race gets postponed to the next day. And throughout the night, Eddie gets sick. Eddie,
Yeah.
He's up all night vomiting. He's got a fever. He's not the same guy.
Right.
He's not able to finish the race. And then Delta Chi gets second his last year.
Well, I went to him in the pits with about, 15 laps to go or so. And I asked him, how are you feeling? Do you want to do this sprint? And he said, I don't feel up to it, put Steve Dayton on. And so we made that happen. And Steve had, a way of sprinting that worked very well in the races outside of Level 5, where he would drop pretty far back in the pack and wind up a big gear and come hauling around faster than people could react to and take off the front. And that was not something we were used to doing in Little 5, number one. But it wasn't sort of the way we had talked about finishing the race. But and so he was about 33rd when the white flag dropped, and he finished second. So he passed, 32 teams or 31 teams in that last lap, which is just amazing. We had some footage of that, and it's it's amazing to watch. Mm-hmm. But we finished second, and that's the way that went. What was really interesting, I was just devastated after that race, because this was the race that we were aiming for. It was Eddie's senior year. It was all this stuff, right? And we came up short. And it took about 2 or 3 weeks of, soul searching and reviewing the race mentally and so forth to figure out that we made quite a few mistakes during that race. I think I counted like 10 or 12 mistakes that we made, and finally came to the conclusion we really didn't deserve to win if we made that many mistakes. And so we vowed to, learn from that and go forward. Of course, Eddie wasn't with us going forward because he was a senior. He'd been, he'd ridden his 4 races and he didn't have eligibility anymore. But there were some interesting things that came out of that. One of which was that we didn't have Eddie to ask anymore, oh, what do we do in this situation? So we had to start thinking for ourselves. And we had to think about the team over longevity. So we lost, I think, either 3 or 4 of those riders. We had to basically build a new team from scratch. Mm-hmm. And of course, we had contacted various riders and so forth. But we were extremely fortunate in that Wayne Stetina, who had just returned from the Olympics, decided to come to IU and ride for Delta Chi. And the interesting thing was somebody interviewed Wayne as he got off the plane in Indianapolis, and he mentioned during that interview that's what he was going to do. And Steve and I were sitting at a football game, IU football game, and they announced that over the loudspeaker.
Oh, wow.
That was the first we knew of it. So,
had you already communicated with Wayne?
Yeah, we'd been talking to Wayne for a year or two. But we were hoping he would come, but he wouldn't make any commitments before the Olympics, because everything in his mind was focused on the Olympics, and he didn't want to make decisions beyond that. He wanted to focus on the Olympics. So
I'm sure that recharged you and Steve and the whole team.
Definitely. I mean, we were sitting next to each other at the football game. We looked at each other with shock and surprise in our faces and thought, okay, that's going to be helpful, and it, of course, was a big help.
How do you teach a guy like Wayne, who's used to doing these long road races by himself, to understand the nuances of Little 5 and to work with a team?
So there are really 2 parts to that question. One is the nuances, and Wayne was a very intelligent guy, very quick study, and we pretty much just had to mention those things once and he'd get it. Okay. The other part of that was that Wayne was a bike racer, and he expected to be continuing his bike racing. He, Little Five was not his only race.
Mm-hmm.
And so Steve was really good at determining first, and then we talked it over, and he kind of had a strategy. He says, Wayne is going to be hard to deal with if we don't teach him that this is a very special race. To him, he races 2 or 3 races a week. It's just another race. Each of those races is just another race, but we have to let him know that this is a special race. So we had to talk to him about the fact that this race occurs once a year. And if you don't win it, you've got a whole year to think about how painful it was that you didn't win, and so forth. And that was a real key part in working with Wayne. The second key part was we had to be fairly tolerant of letting him go and race some of these other races, because after all, that was what he did, right?
Right.
And so, like when he told us he didn't want to go to quals because he was going to be racing someplace that weekend, as a coach, your first reaction is, well, you got to go to quals, But we stepped back and we thought about it, and we go, I think we got 4 guys that can qualify. So that's the important part. Let's let Wayne do his thing. Yeah. So we had to. There was some give and take there from.
You guys qualified 5th that year, 73, without Wayne.
Yes, without Wayne, right?
Who was the competition? Do you remember who you guys were mainly competing against?
Well, it was a little bit different each year, but Fiji's were always strong. ATOs were always strong. Sometimes SAEs, and of course, probably the most dominant during that period, or the period prior to that, was Phi Size. So we always had to watch the Phi Size because we knew they could win at any time. Mm-hmm. But those were probably the most dominant teams.
What kind of race strategy, if you recall, did you guys have in 73 with Wayne starting the race?
Well, we had to figure out, how to have him on the bike most of the race, because he had the capability to do that, and because if Wayne was on the bike, other teams would be hesitant to do, to try and take off or, mess with us.
Neutralize the race if he's on there.
Yeah. So we did a lot of work on how to build the race around Wayne. And what happened was, early in the race, we had a wreck. Wayne went down. And we had him pretty well prepped. You talked about the nuances and so forth of, if you have a wreck, you get on your bike, you take off, and then you check your bike and your body, in
that order.
And so it was, those were things we drilled into the riders. Because in those days, if you got in a wreck, sometimes an official on the side of the track would just pull you over and talk to you and check out to see how you were and that sort of thing. And, you can lose a lap pretty quickly like that. So we had to get up and get going before an official could grab you. And then as soon as you got going, you had to check to see if you were injured or the bike was injured, and so on.
How far back was he after the crash? Half lap?
He was about 0.8 of a lap down. And we were just about to be lapped when he got his bike untangled and, was able to get on and go. And so he knew what his job was. He had to catch back up, right? And so I didn't have to communicate all that much with him. But he made up the lost ground by himself pretty much. He pretty much tagged the back of the pack before he made an exchange. And Jim Kirkwood, one of our rivals, walked down to the pit and said, "Randy, if I hadn't seen that with my own eyes, I would never have believed it." And but I was actually on his last about his last lap. I noticed that he didn't look at the pit, and it was a cardinal rule that anytime you came around the pit, you looked in the pit for signals and got eye contact and so forth. And he didn't look this time. And I was about to yell at him about his, that he should, keep his eyes on the pit, when I noticed that his face was really ashen white. And that told me that he was in deep oxygen debt. And I was just kind of mortified about, can we get him all the way around 35-6 seconds around the track to doing an exchange before he passes out. And so while everybody else was cheering and so forth, I was just really shocked.
What was it like when you came off the bike and this exhausted, I'm sure?
Well, yeah, but the first thing that happened was just past our pit on the straightaway, he caught a wheel. And so he was able to take a couple of breaths, get a little oxygen in his bloodstream, and do a little, wheel of a straggler. But that sort of got him prepped such that I made sure that there was a rider ready for the exchange, even though none of us, I hadn't given him a signal to exchange. He hadn't given us a signal. It's time. Let's make sure we're ready, and and we waved him in, and he came in. So even in triumphant moments, sometimes there are these issues that pop up that cause you concern.
Wayne ends up riding like 140 laps of that race. And
yeah.
Is the finish close, or is it a sprint finish? Remind me how it went down.
We went on to get a lap. After we caught the pack, we went on to get a lap on the field. And with that lap on the field, the second place team was Kappa Sigs. And they walked down and said, do you mind if we sit your wheel on your last lap? And we said, they were friends, and we said, no, that's fine. So we finished about a lap and a half ahead, and Kirkwood on the wheel then meant he was a half lap up. And so they finished second. It was the only race that I can think of where we determined both the first and second place finishes.
There you go. So Delta Chi gets their first victory. You and Steve, the mission is complete. You won the race. What's that feeling like for everybody?
Well, it was just totally exhilarating. It was the best feeling ever, right? And we run out on the infield and celebrate and do all this stuff, and this is something we'd been working hard for 5 years essentially, and finally accomplished it. So it was a real high point. What was interesting to me and quite telling was we were confident now that we could continue to build teams and sort of keep the process rolling, because we'd been through this was our sort of second team working with. But what was interesting to me when we won the second race the following year, I didn't have those same feelings of elation. And I was like, oh, we won another one, where's that big feeling, and it took me a few weeks of kind of soul searching to figure out what that was about. But it turned out that winning the race per se was not exactly the most important thing. Instead, there were things like the relationships that you built and the people things that happened that were as important, and sometimes for some people more important than the actual finishing first. So it changed our philosophy of how we coached. And now it was about helping these boys turn into men, essentially helping them mature a bit and giving them some life, using Little Five to build some life lessons, and also to prove to each rider that went through that he was capable of more than he thought he was. And so it was about raising the level of individuals that came through the program as much as it was winning. So at that point, we looked at the journey, all of the practices and all the work that went into it as kind of the race.
Yeah.
And the actual race was sort of the graduation ceremony. It was the commencement.
How do you get the riders to buy into that part? Because everyone wants the trophy. Everything's more fun when you win. How do you really get the riders to buy into the journey part?
Well, it wasn't something that we had to get them to buy into. It was a change in the way we coached. And so it was challenging an individual who thought he could ride 20 laps to have him get to the point where he knew he could ride 30 laps. It was challenging individuals to take that step further, and when the whole team's watching you, and today, you give them this assignment, today you're going to ride a 50 lap set, and you have to maintain with the pack or ahead of the pack, whatever, but not behind the pack. And with the whole team there sort of prodding the guy on and the adrenaline's flowing and so forth, the guy accomplishes that, right? And it's not something he thought he could accomplish before. So it takes him up a level. And it was just really a difference in the way we coached, not in anything we asked them to buy into. But they got the message over time for sure.
Going into the 74 race, you already mentioned it. You guys won that race again. You get Gary Reiberard joins the team.
Yes.
Mike Alexander joins the team.
Yes.
It's a mystery whether Wayne's going to ride or not that year. Like how does that play out coming into race day in that 74 year?
So 74 was like Wayne's second year, right? Yeah. I mean, the most important things were that riders knew that they had to step up if he didn't ride. That was one thing. Mike Alexander, for instance, had just begun riding a bicycle, much less racing. And one of the things that he learned he could do, he was prompted on one of the rides, hey, you got to sit the wheel, you don't lose the wheel no matter what. And he took that to heart, and not instantly, but over a period of a short time, he made himself do that. So that's an example of a rider getting challenged, and in this case, not by coaches, but other riders to step up to the next level. And that was a big deal to him. Hey, I sat with the pack the whole day today. I didn't drop off, so there were these daily challenges. And when each time someone knew that they had gotten to the next level, it was like a big deal. So we had a lot of that going on. But yeah, guys stepped up big time. Gary improved a lot that season. Obviously, I just mentioned Mike Alexander did, others as well. It was a good year for us. And then Wayne decided to ride.
When did he decide to ride, or did you guys know all along he was going to ride and just kept it secret?
That year, I think not all along, but pretty early on, we felt he was going to ride. And I wasn't on campus that year. Steve was. Steve came back to do his master's. and I had graduated, so I was off working. And so Steve sort of was the day-to-day coach for the first time, and where I had that role in previous years. But I came, the night before the race, we always put our heads together as coaches and sort of worked out sort of final details of the race after we put the team to bed. And we did scenarios for that race until about 3 or 4 in the morning. And every one of those scenarios, we came out winning by 2 laps. And that was, we kept saying, yeah, that's not possible. Let's do this again, And finally, by about 3 or 4, we said, well, we need to get some sleep. Let's go to bed. If we only win by 1 lap, that's not the worst thing in the world. So, and sure enough, we won by 2 laps the following day.
Following that race, IUSF changes the rule that kind of eliminates guys like Wayne who've got previous race experience.
Yeah.
So Wayne's no longer eligible.
Yep.
And then, so does that take the wind out of the wind out of the sails for the team, or do you guys just keep pushing on because you developed this program now?
Well, even before they made the rules, there was a lot of discussion about that. And Wayne had said, I don't want to ride next year. It's just not fair. And so that was the part, even before the rules changed, that took the wind out of our sails in that respect. But by now we had a pretty well-established program. It wasn't just about a single rider in general. I mean, clearly Wayne was a rider that created a lot of the success for us in that time. But we now had a program. We had, as I mentioned before, we had an organization, and we had riders that were interested in coming in and riding. And so we just had to look sort of next man up.
What does next few years look like on race day with Rybar and is Greg, and Greg Silence joins at some point? I forget when.
Yeah, well, we lost that first race after Wayne left, but then we won the next 2.
Okay.
As I recall. And the one we lost, I'm pretty sure that was to the Fijis. The following year, there wasn't a very strong field other than, the Fijis and us were pretty much the strongest 2 teams. And so we just, focused on them. We thought we understood what their strategy was going to be. And we just, took it to them.
Is that the race where Rybar doesn't come off until the Fijis exchange?
Yes.
He ends up riding like a 60 lap first set or something.
They Jay Allard rode a 50 lap set, and we rode a 51 lap set. Alexander rode a 51 lap set, and I told him before he got on the bike, I said, you know what your job is. It's to ride 1 more lap than they do. And I'm going to be yelling stuff out from the pit. Ignore everything I say, because I've watched Allard. He looks at our pit more than our riders do.
Right.
So I'm going to be saying things for his benefit, not yours. So you focus on what your job is and just ignore everything I have to say. And about 45 laps into the race, I yell out, "Okay, Gary, give me give me another 20 good laps." And Ellert's face just sank, right? He obviously was hoping I was going to be yelling, "Bring it in." And so he hung in there until lap 50, but he brought it in on lap 50. And we were pretty certain that was kind of blowing their strategy. So
when did you guys start to develop that sort of mental trickery or that mental psychology work?
It started about Eddie's junior or senior year when other riders would challenge Eddie at the track. And it was pretty clear that they were trying to mentally defeat him in practice before the race ever occurred. And so we learned it from some of those riders. We at some point we decided that was something we should probably be doing because it seemed to be effective for some people.
Do you have any good examples of things you? I mean, I heard an example once where somebody wore like a boot on their foot on the school bus, the campus bus, and within minutes, the rumor had spread all around campus that it might have been Bill Brisman had broken his foot or something.
Yeah, it was before Bill's days, but yeah, we did one of those. We were having some problems with some of the information was getting leaked out of our meetings, and so we had this. We put out some disinformation, and that was one example of the disinformation that one of our good riders had a broken leg and wasn't going to be able to ride. And this was like 2 weeks before the race or so. So people got all excited and everything. And then he shows up race day, raring to go, which is another sort of that takes them down at that point. So yeah, we got involved in a fair amount of that. I used to tell the guys that we had to have the best preparation, and there were 3 parts of preparation. One was physical, which was the part that everybody was pretty tuned into. Mm-hmm. Another was intellectual, to know what to do. And the third was psychological. And the psychology was related to several things. One is if you had a wreck, if you were involved in a wreck, you had to know that wasn't the end of the world, that you were going to get back and get back in this race and win it. And unless that wreck occurred on the last lap, there was going to be that opportunity. So it was mental, psychological preparation for our guys. But later on, we got into sort of a little bit of psychological preparation for our opponents as well.
What did the physical prep look like? Were the Delta Chi train as hard or harder than other teams? Like what separated them in that arena?
All of those teams in those early days had at least one rider that was a very good rider. Eddie in those first 4 years, Wayne later. And it made no sense to either of those guys to train less hard than they normally would to maintain their level, right?
Right.
And the rest of the riders had to keep up with them, essentially. So I pretty much ignored the physical side. First of all, Eddie knew more about it than I did in those early days. Wayne knew more about it than I did in the next generation. And pretty much tradition took over from there. So I didn't get too involved in the physical preparation as long as we had somebody on the team that was a driver that was going to keep that pace moving out on the roads.
Gotcha.
And we kind of let the riders do their own thing out on the roads. The night before, we would have each day we would have a meeting, and we would ask the riders what they felt, what kind of training they felt they needed tomorrow. And it would, we need a hard workout. We need to go long, Mm-hmm. We had our hard workout yesterday. Let's do some long, slow distance recovery ride kind of thing. So they would call what their ride was going to be. And I would just note it down in the notebook and hold them to that, because sometimes they would come to me and say, yesterday we said we were going to go hard today. We really don't feel like that. And blah, blah, blah. So we're thinking we're going to change such and such. And I'd say, no, we made that decision in the meeting last night. You're doing what you said you were going to do. But those were rare moments. But pretty much we let them do their own thing on the rides. When it came, in those days, almost everybody, the good teams at least, would go out for an hour or two ride on the roads and then come to the track, and everybody showed up at the track. And so you would show up at the track and you'd already put in some miles on the road, and then you did your track work. And the track work was typically skills work, getting the exchanges right. Making sure we would learn what the other teams could do and would do in certain situations. And so the track time was not so much about physicality, but it was about you know, intellectual stuff and psychological stuff, brain work.
Yeah. To go back to 76 race, Rybar and Mark Dayton finishes that race. Wins
Yes.
that race.
Yes.
His brother had ridden for Delta Chi before that.
Yes.
And then Mark joins the team, and Mark's a pretty high level rider himself.
Well, Mark's thing was that he could spin the pedals faster than anyone.
Well, he's a little guy.
He's a little skinny guy, and he can do 200 RPMs on the pedals. We clocked that on we filmed him. Film in those days, not video. It was a long time ago, but he could do 200 RPMs on the pedals. And nobody really knew Mark. He was coming in kind of new. Everybody thought Gary would be sprinting, and of course Gary did that first 50 lap set, and we rode a good hard race, and we decided, we had two guys that could win the sprint, either Gary or Mark. But given the amount of laps we were having Gary do, we thought, yeah, let's put Mark on when he's going to be a lot fresher than Gary, and we'll put Mark on for the finish, and he did fine.
Mm-hmm. Another victory.
Yep.
It's starting to get old by now, probably, huh? Getting bored of it.
No, it wasn't at all boring, but it was this new set of challenges of how can you get these riders to perform way better than they thought they could, and how can you show them new and innovative ways to win? Because one of the things we learned early on was you can't win the same way, year after year, because other teams figure out what you're doing, and so it was always, okay, what talent do we have, and how are we going to use this to its best advantage, and how are we going to do it in some new and unique way?
Did you notice other teams trying to copy your style or take?
Oh yeah, in Eddie's senior year, we brought 3 trainer bikes to the pit so that our guys could keep, stay warm and not cramp up and so forth, and always be ready to ride. And nobody else on the stadium had that. There were mattresses and there were folding chairs and things like that the riders not in the race were using. Within 2 years, pretty much every team out there had trainers or rollers or equivalent, where they had the riders that weren't on the bike were riding. And the other thing, of course, we did was we faced those towards the track so that the guys were focused on where, they could sit there and spin a little bit and watch what was going on. Mm-hmm. And we also taught our riders that, if they see something, don't assume that everybody else has seen it. Yell, call it out so that everybody on your team knows, oh, there was a wreck in 3, or, this or that happened. So we had, lots of eyes on the track and people calling them out. For instance, if I was trying to get somebody some water or something to eat or something like that, I might have my back to the track for a few seconds or something. I might not see something, but if the guys yelled it out, boom, I spun around, I could see it quickly. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of little things like that we did, that we worked really well together as a team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 1977, let's go through these years here. Rybar wins the sprint in 77.
I should get my book out to remember which years were which. So Rybar wins the sprint.
I took some notes.
Yeah, okay. Who was on the team that year? Rybar and who?
I don't know the rest of that.
Oh. Okay, so this was so this would have been the second year that we won of 2 in a row, right?
I think it was all senior team, because the next year.
Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. All senior team. Yeah. Rybar wins the sprint.
78 is a fascinating year for me because you get an all rookie team. You get Bill Brisman, Al Williams, and Gutowski, I believe. And they don't do so well. They go into the race thinking they're hot shots and they got it all figured out.
Yeah.
walk me through that and post race. And I understand you guys had a meeting like the day after the race where you set the stage for these guys on how to win.
Yeah. So the week before the race, the guys were all telling us how they were all ready and they were going to win and all this stuff, you know. And I told Steve a day or two before the race, I don't think they have a sense yet of the level at which the competition, you know, there's competition out there, and I don't think they have a sense yet of how hard this race is to win. And so, sure enough, we finished 10th, I think you said, and the guys were pretty humbled by that. And we had a meeting the next day, you know, in those days, the tradition, I guess, among coaches would be to yell at people and, you know, so on and so forth. But that was not our style at all. And so we said, okay, you guys have tasted a race now. Now you know what it's about. And now you know that it takes a lot of effort to get to the place that you thought you were at before the race. And today is the first day of your next season. So you have to decide what you're going to do differently and what you're going to do better to win the race next year. And that's pretty much about all that was said. There may have been a few other comments. I don't remember exactly, but that was the notion. And these guys walked out of there all fired up, and they spent a lot of time thinking about, how much harder they were going to train and things like that. And I remember on one occasion coming to the house, I think it was on a Friday night or something. It was dark outside. It was snowing. There was about 1 inch of snow on the ground, or maybe a little bit more on the streets. And the guys were just coming back from a ride, and they were all dressed up, in their winter garb, and they came in and they were obviously tired, so they'd ridden hard, So I thought, oh yeah, this is a lot better.
Yeah.
I think they got it.
Yeah, they were getting it.
Yep.
And then Little Five legends are born from that moment.
Yep.
Right. 79 race. DK wins again. It's Bill Brisman wins his first out of 3.
Yes.
First 3 in a row.
Yep.
The guys are getting it. But Chris Katowski's ruled ineligible because of the Cat 1, Cat 2 rule.
Yep.
That'd be frustrating for the team, I'm sure.
I didn't think much in terms of the team. It was devastating for Chris, who had gone through a lot of tough times, let's say, in his life outside of Little Five, outside of racing and so forth. And to him, it was just more example of the injustices coming his way. I mean, he took it very personally. And I can remember discussions with him, and I told him, and he felt it was very unfair. And I said, well, everyone, has to answer to a higher authority. And I said, we need to look into this and do some research and find out, who can overturn this. So we looked into the structure, the corporate structure of foundation and so on and so forth. And, there really wasn't anybody they had to answer to. So we prepared a lawsuit against the university, and delivered news of that, to our attorney, contacted the university's attorney and told them that, we were filing a lawsuit. And so the attorney came to one of the Writers' Council's meetings, and they described how maybe this wasn't fair, and they were going to let Writers' Council vote on whether he was going to be eligible or not. Riders Council voted that he wasn't going to be eligible. So we lost that round. I conveyed that back to our attorney, who talked to their attorney again. And so the attorney in Armstrong sort of overruled that vote 2 days later, and he was eligible. And it was, there were always politics involved in Little Five and Foundation, but mostly it was politics around, you're a little house and nobody, we're not going to get a lot of donations from your house. So we want one of the big houses to win. It's kind of the underlying philosophy, I think.
I'm sure that, did you feel that you felt that attitude as you guys were getting better at Little Five? And
yeah, for sure. But it abated each year that we did well. I think a little, it receded a little bit each year, and we gained. Once we did the lawsuit thing, I think we gained the respect of the organization to where they said, okay, we're going to try and keep this thing more on the up and up. But yeah, over if you win enough races, you gain the respect.
And then in 1980, Chris gets to come back. Chris Katowski.
Yes.
He gets to come back.
Yes.
And he gets that victory with his team they've been training with.
Yeah.
And they win by 2 laps. I've got written down here. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So the team's on a roll again. We got
team's on a roll again. But more importantly, Chris, I talked about how I felt after various races earlier, and this was a race where, we were sort of again running out to the infield victory kind of thing, victory celebration, and Chris, I saw, was just sitting on a step still by the pit wall, and I went over to him and we had a talk, and this was like the first thing that had gone right in his life in 2 or 3 years of tough times. And he was overwhelmed by that. And it was, to me, a great example of showing, demonstrating, or having him demonstrate that things were not as bad in his life as they looked. There was light at the end of the tunnel. So that was a magic moment. So now we're back on a roll. Sorry for that interjection.
Well, Chris was my coach when I started riding Little Five.
Right. Yeah.
He carried that passion, that enthusiasm, and really conveyed to us the opportunity that we had in front of us to use this bike race as a vehicle for that. And yeah. So I didn't know some of that story. So thanks for sharing that. 1980 is also the last race on the old stadium.
Yes.
What was it like racing there during those times? And that there was a running track that was outfitted to hold a bike race. What was that like?
Well, first of all, the turns were tighter and there was a curb on the inside. So if somebody moved you over into that curb and your pedal hit that curb, you were going down.
What do you mean by curb? Like, explain that for me.
Well, like you'd see the curb on a street. There was concrete layer that was about 4 or 5 inches that stuck up, and that was the edge of the track.
Okay.
And so nowadays it's flat and dished out. Mm-hmm. So you can actually run into the ride into the infield on the new track, but you couldn't do that on the old track. You were going down if you got close to that curb. And so there were a lot more wrecks on the old track. The other difference was that I mentioned the turns were tighter. Mm-hmm. And there was no banking. There's a slight banking on the new track. But anyway, more than 90% of the riders couldn't pedal through the turns flat out, ride flat out and pedal through the turns. They'd have to stop, hesitate so they didn't hit their pedal as they went through, and then pick up riding again after they got towards the straightaway. So we always were able to teach our riders how to pedal through the turns, and we always rode in positions that kept us away from that curb.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of other teams didn't do that, let's say, and wound up in wrecks and so forth that we didn't. So those were the major differences in the track. And we were great at using those differences to our advantage, and better than most at using those differences to our advantage.
It sounds like one rider that could take the turns at speed could almost go faster than a pack that was unorganized.
Definitely. Definitely. And even on the last lap, if you think about a sprint lap, if your rider can pedal all the way through those turns on the last lap, he's going to cut 2 seconds off of that last lap. And if he's paired against a rider that doesn't know how to do that or isn't in a position to do that, that's 2 seconds is a big deal. So
right,
it helped us win a lot of races. But the main thing about that year is we set like 2 or 3 records. The team was very interested in setting some records that year because they knew they would last forever because it would be tied to that track.
Oh, yes.
And so I think in quals, Mark Dayton rode the fastest lap.
Bill Brisman.
Bill Brisman, rode the fastest lap. We got fastest lap that year. We got a bunch of records that would never fall because of the change in the track.
Do you remember what the lap time was for the fastest lap back on that track? About?
I don't. I had pictures of what our quals lap was. I don't remember. I probably have pictures somewhere of what the fastest lap is, but I don't recall. But after the race, we were walking back to the house, and we got stopped by the president of the university, who wanted to shake everybody's hand and congratulate us, so forth. So it was, that there was sort of extra icing on the cake that year.
Mm-hmm. Were the Little Five teams, Little Five community sad to see the stadium go, or were they like good riddance, let's build a new one? What was the vibe like?
The vibe was something of not knowing, because the construction hadn't started on the new track yet. And what was interesting to us was that we got a hold of the blueprints for the track and started doing strategy about how we would adapt to this new track months and months before anybody ever saw the track. So once again, sort of information or it was, it was helpful to us. I think I probably still have a copy of those blueprints somewhere. But to think about that there would be banking and, this, that, and the other, definitely changed the way we thought about the sprint at the end of the race.
Yeah.
And
going into that 81 race, like what kind of things did you adjust for being on a new track? With the turns being wider, so you can pedal through them easier.
Yeah, it meant that everybody could pedal through the turns, and so we didn't. That was an advantage that we lost. And the dished out sort of inside curb was, or the lack of an inside curb was, just meant there were going to be fewer wrecks. So in races on the old track, you might expect, 8 to 10 wrecks during the race. We were going to see 2 or 3. So wrecks weren't going to be as big of a thing to deal with.
Does that mean you could sit back in a pack more, or how'd you use that?
We didn't do that really, or maybe one position further back, but we still stayed towards the front of the pack. It meant that the pack changed shape.
Mm-hmm.
It meant people were riding a little further away from the curb for some reason, which opened up that little center pocket that you see today. that some guys like to ride in.
Right.
But we didn't let our guys do that because that wasn't a position that you could control the race from. And we were all about controlling the race in those days.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to control the pace of the race. We wanted to control what happened and when it happened and all this stuff. So a lot of our philosophy about how to ride the race remained the same, at least during the first few years. Now we made little adaptations as we went, but yeah, that first, we had an experienced team going into that new track, and we had plenty of chance to test that track out, in practice and so forth. So a lot of stuff stayed the same.
Did it feel? I'm sure it felt different being in this whole new arena, bigger space, and did it still feel like Little Five then once the race got started?
Yeah, it still felt like Little Five, but the biggest change was over the years. The start finish line was on the other side of the track at first, and then moved to this side and so forth. So there were a lot of changes that took place during that time frame. So it was less about I remember what we did last year, let's do that this year, and more about discovering new ways to win.
Yeah. Was there a consensus that taking a lap on a new track wasn't going to happen, so it was going to be a pack sprint?
Maybe among some people, and probably among quite a few people, but we did get laps on that new track, but it was definitely a little harder to get laps because of the fact that we didn't have the turns and the curves and the wrecks and all that stuff to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm. And Delta Chi wins the race on the new track again.
Yep.
That's 7 out of 10 years or something. That's a lot of victories.
Yep.
Bill Brisman's last year. What was it like to coach Billy B and see his progression? And he's considered one of the best riders ever in Little Five now.
Well, Bill was great to coach and work with and be with and so forth, and as was the whole team. Those guys had mostly, within one or two exceptions, had ridden together for 4 years, and they had their own personalities. I mean, it was just a really fun team to work with. You could tell from the way they came back their sophomore year and won that race that they were going to be a force then for the next 2 years. So, and they were, and those were days when we learned in the early days, to us, any other team that might be competition was our enemy. But we that was a team, and even earlier than that, where we gained a lot more friends that were on other teams. Initially, we didn't want our riders talking to any other teams because we didn't want anybody to pick up any of the knowledge that we had from the race. But over the years, we've gained friends from other teams as well. So that was important in that time frame. But Bill was fun to coach because even after winning his first race, I mean, those guys knew the race really well now. And so it was just, fine tune everything every year.
82, Chris Katowski comes back because he had missed that year, but He's got all rookie team.
Yeah.
Chris is training with some other teams. He makes friends.
Training
with Jim Mahaffey from 5 Lots. They're kind of raising the bar of the competition. It's a big stage, a lot of media there, big race, and Chris doesn't win the sprint at the end.
Yeah, Mahaffey does. Yeah,
from Mahaffey, and that's got to be. It's hard to lose.
It's hard to lose, but that was a race that we felt we lost because they had spent time together. Because Chris essentially taught Mahaffey how to win that race, so whether he did it intentionally or not, and sure he didn't do it intentionally. But that was, it was to get to a point where, with a year or two's perspective, you understand maybe what the reasons were a little better. Mm-hmm. And Mahaffey was just this, he was a guy with a lot of will, and he had the will to win, and he won it. And God bless him.
What's the feeling of the fraternity, the bike race, or the bike team at this point? Like, is it still going strong? Is the fraternity just clicking off and things are working well?
Well, there's starting to be some jealousy of the bike team, I think, in that time frame. Or shortly thereafter. I don't remember exactly when that started, but I was hearing things that, we want to be more of an academic house, or we want to be more of a social house, or whatever, not just a bike house. And my, response was, fine, if you want to take the academics up a level, and overshadow the bike team, do it, or other aspects. Mm-hmm. But too often they were saying, well, the bike team needs to not do as well, or something, right? And I vehemently disagreed with that part, as, we need to keep the bike team doing its thing. You guys just step up your game in these other areas that you want to. But some friction developed over that time, as you're aware. And at one point, and the house was having some other difficulties as well. So at one point, they decided to kick out one of the riders.
That happens in 84, but the year before that, in 83, the team fails to qualify.
Yeah.
Which is a big sigh of relief probably around the campus.
Yeah.
Celebration that Delta Chi is maybe unraveling a little bit. And it turns out to be a big moment in the team's history.
Yeah. And I wasn't around as much that year. I was living in California by then, I believe, and involved in other things. And I didn't spend as much time with the team. And I was shocked to hear that they didn't qualify, and disappointed. But, if you're doing Little Five, you run into these shocks and disappointments from time to time. At least if you do it long enough, you do. So that was disappointing. But then, as we mentioned, one of the guys got kicked out of the house, and the other guy said, well, if he's going, I'm going. And so I called Eddie Van Guys to tell him the news that this, the team was thinking about leaving the house and forming an independent team. And he said, well, you know what we have to call them, don't you? And I said, no, what? He goes, Cutters. Mm-hmm. And so the Cutter team was born.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the Delta Chi alumni kind of came over and supported that first Cutter team.
Definitely. Yeah, we moved the whole program over.
Gave the Cutter team a big boost from the get-go, and they win their first race. And
yeah, which is like unheard of. Nobody goes out there and wins their first attempt, right? Yeah. But I think that was a sure part of the fact that the program went with it.
And you talked about earlier about how your coaching style became one of developing riders and helping boys become men. And that 84 team was full of guys that kind of elevated themselves, including Adam Giles and Randy Strong, and Beck, and Scott Sinise. Like they kind of needed that themselves as well.
Yeah, and they kind of went into their training with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, a little bit of anger about what had happened to the team and so forth. So they took a little extra adrenaline with them on those rides, and they trained really hard, and they were also, I would see them coming back, having been out in the snow or rain or something, having trained really hard in really bad weather. So you knew that they had the idea.
Randy, you gave me a bit of advice once after a Little Five that Cutters didn't win, and I was kind of feeling kind of low, bummed out. And you just said something simple like, "You can't win them all." And hearing that from you in that moment, like, was the best thing I needed, because of course we want to try to win them all, but
Sure.
hear that from you was really helpful for me, and it helped keep me going, knowing that it's okay to not win, because like you said earlier, the journey of it is much more important. And the more I can focus on that part and help these kids, the more we will win, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And surely, I mean, if you look at the records, Cutters have done quite well over the years.
Yeah.
Largely with you at the helm.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was hooked. And I had some great mentors, and then as I first started coaching, I was just trying to copy what Adam and Chris taught me. And over the years, I allowed myself to come through and find my own rhythm and routine. And a lot of it is what you said, like going back to the journey parts and making it fun and allowing the riders to be riders and trusting that they got it in them to do it. If you were to pick some top memories of your little five, whether as a coach, as a spectator, like what were some of those moments for you?
Well, I think one of the top moments was when we won the first race, as I mentioned earlier, after trying for 5 years and not getting there and finally getting there. That was a big moment. And I also alluded to the second race. That was a big moment. Not so much that it was exciting, but it changed our philosophy a lot in a very good direction.
Mm-hmm.
As a spectator, probably watching Noble Guyan win his first sprint was pretty amazing, because I was, convinced with a lap and a half to go that he was in a terrible position and was unlikely to win. And he did all the right things and pulled it out, and with a little luck as well. But that was just an awesome moment to watch Noble win that sprint. It was like, my heart was sinking with a lap and a half to go. And with a lap to go, it was like, yes.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah.
How has Little Five changed since the DK dynasty to now? What do you see differently in Little Five?
I think the biggest change that I see is that, when we started out, we were able to take what was very much an amateur race and just take it up a level big time. A lot of the teams out there, when I first became aware of Little Five, would train 3-4 months before the race. That's not something many teams think about today. It's a year-round kind of effort. And we were the first team to really make it a year-round effort that I know of. Now, the Feisais may have been doing that. The Feisais had won like 6 races before we got started winning races. So they may have been doing that. And I'm sure they were in some of those, 10 years before, that sort of thing, when they had Dave Blaze and so forth. But most of the teams out there would train, maybe 3 months going into the race. So there was the level of competition. By the time we sort of stepped it up a big notch, we didn't have the level of competition that exists today. I looked at last year's race, and when we were racing those early days, probably 90% of the teams would have done their first exchange by lap 11. Most of the teams did their first exchange on lap 10. I looked at the race this past year, and most of the teams were still on the bike and ready to make their first exchange around lap 20. Mm-hmm. So, there were where we would have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, sometimes 5 teams that were at a level that we had to really believe that they were stiff competition. these days, looking at last year's race, there were, 10, 12 teams out there that were as competitive as we were in those old days. So the competition has increased. Nobody in the days when we started, except for probably Eddie Van Gys, knew what the Tour de France was. Now probably everybody does, or nearly everybody out there, right? They know about all these other races, and they know about the levels of racing and so forth, and they train in the wintertime with those things in mind, where most of the other teams didn't train that much in the wintertime. So that's the biggest change. The track has changed, and that changed the complexion of some things.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest change to me is a lot more teams are doing much better preparation, physically anyway.
Yeah. Okay. I know Little Five has been a big part of your life. Like
Yes.
The friendships and the experience. Like, can you imagine, had your brother not had that idea, like what your life would be like?
I can expect that it would be good, but I can't really imagine that. I mean, the little, even though I went through the business school, right? Little Five taught me more about management and taught me more about how to build an organization, and taught me how to work with people to get everybody moving in the right direction. Little Five riders are volunteers. If you yell at them, or if they can decide just not to show up the next day, right? So it doesn't make sense to be demanding, or at least it didn't make sense to me. Instead, it would be, hey, let's look at that one little thing you did on the exchange there that caused the rear end of the bike to move over into the other guy. Now, if you change that a little bit, it'll go a lot more smoothly. So we always focused on the details. We didn't get down on the riders. We were there to lift them up, not put them down. And that was a good lesson to learn throughout the rest of my life. But yeah, there were tons of. I mean, clearly to me, when I left college, there were things I learned in classes, probably most of which I don't remember anymore. But there was Little Five that those lessons lasted a lifetime.
What's it like for you now when you come back to the race and you're walking up through into the grandstands? And what's it like to watch a race from the stands, and how do you watch a race?
Well, what I see is very different than what most people see in the race, because over the years, my brain has learned to tune 90% of it out and just focus on the things that are really important. I can pretty much always tell you who's in the lead of the race, and I can tell you how they got there. Whereas, the average person that's seeing the race for their first or second time is experiencing the same thing I did when I saw the race my first or second time, right? It just looks like chaos out there. So yeah, what I see is a lot different. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, I can't watch the race or even the videos of it without getting super excited, right? I mean, it's become a part of, so much a part of me that it's exciting to watch the race, no matter if I haven't had any involvement in it in this year or not, in any particular year. Mm-hmm. It's also, there have been times when coaches have asked me to help them with a particular situation they're having, and that's pretty gratifying to know that you can make a difference in just 30 minutes or an hour versus the many hours that they put in over the time frame. So that's fun too.
You were at the race last year. You and Eddie were in the infield together watching the race. I think, at least I saw you before the race on the infield. Having your buddy Eddie there again, that's got to be nice.
Yeah, it was great, and Dave Blaze was there, and some other of the older riders were there. It was super fun, but I can tell you that it was great spending time with them. But it's harder to watch the race from the infield than it is from the stands. You can't, when you watch it from the stands, you see it like a chessboard. And when you watch it from the infield, you're spinning around all the time trying to keep track of what's going on. And you can keep track of what's going on, but it's a lot harder, and you miss a lot of things. And it's why watching it on video afterwards, I saw a lot of things that I missed during the race.
Well, Coach, I want to thank you for your time, and thank you for all you put in Little Five and helping make it what it is today. And thanks for your mentorship with me. And I really appreciate it. And I want to thank your brother Steve for getting all this started and everything he put into it as well. So thank you both. And I love you both. And I wouldn't be here without you. I know that.
Well, it's great to hear, Jim, but I know that you've put a lot into it. And I watched you, take the Cutters to a successful route and spent my time thinking, yeah, I should just back off here and just let things go because they're going just fine now, So, but it's been good interacting over the years, and appreciate your thoughts and also the efforts that you put into the team.
Yeah, thank you. I look forward to seeing you in April.
Great, soon. Maybe even sooner.
Good. All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Randy. That was great to catch up with you. I love you. I can't wait to see you again. And I can't wait for this year's Little 500.